In Texas, farmers weren't just fighting animals. They were battling a fast-breeding, land-destroying super pig army 2 million strong.
In Texas, they're going hog wild over wild hogs. The feral animals are causing hundreds of millions of dollars of damage to crops across the state.
These beasts tore through fields like bulldozers, reproduced faster than rabbits, and even learned to outsmart traps. Hunting made it worse. Bounties backfired, but then someone cracked the code. Using smartphones, live cameras, and remote-triggered traps, they erased entire bloodlines in a single silent move. What they built next? That's the part that shocked everyone, and it changed the war forever. Keep watching. America's most destructive immigrant. To understand the sheer genius of this trap, you first have to understand the enemy. And this isn't just a pest. This is an invader, an immigrant that never belonged here, and one that has become the most destructive force in American agriculture. The story of how they got here is a tale of two massive mistakes, centuries apart. In 1539, Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto brought domestic pigs to Florida as a walking food supply. Many escaped and went feral. For centuries, their numbers stayed relatively small. Then came the second mistake. In the early 1900s, wealthy landowners imported true Eurasian wild boars from Europe for sport hunting. These animals were bigger, meaner, and built for survival. The two populations interbred, creating a hybrid super pig, combining the size and aggression of the Eurasian boar with the explosive reproduction rate of domestic pigs. Texas now faces 2.6 million of these hybrids, and the numbers behind this invasion are absolutely staggering. Let's talk about Texas, because Texas is ground zero. The Lone Star State is now home to an estimated 2.6 million wild boars. But it gets worse. This population isn't just big, it's exploding. Every single year, the wild boar population grows by 18 to 21%. They aren't just staying put either. They are expanding their territory northward at a rate of almost 8 miles every year. But how did they get so out of control so fast? The answer lies in a truly terrifying reproductive cycle. This is where the situation goes from bad to hopeless, and why traditional methods never stood a chance. A female wild boar, called a sow, is a baby-making machine. She can reach sexual maturity and start having babies of her own when she is just 6 to 8 months old. That's a child having children. The pregnancy, or gestation, lasts only about 4 months. And when she gives birth, she doesn't have just 1 or 2 piglets. The average litter size is 4 to 6, but when food is plentiful, she can pop out 10, even 12 young at a time. Now, hold on, because here is the real kicker. Within 1 week of weaning her piglets, which happens about a month after they're born, she can get pregnant again. She can theoretically have 2 full litters every single year. Let's do the nightmare math. Start with just 1 breeding pair. Under ideal conditions, that 1 pair could produce over 20 offspring in a year. Those offspring will be having their own babies within 6 months. The growth isn't just linear, it's exponential. It's a tidal wave of flesh and tusks. You could remove 100 boars from a property, and if you leave even a few breeding females behind, they will replace that entire number in less than 2 years. You are not just fighting animals. You are fighting a biological algorithm designed for total domination. But the final piece of this terrifying puzzle is what they do with all those numbers. What does their destruction actually look like? This isn't just about them eating some crops. It's about how they are physically built to dismantle the land itself. The wild boar's most devastating weapon is its snout. It's made of tough cartilage, and it's attached to a set of incredibly powerful neck and shoulder muscles. They use this snout like a biological bulldozer blade, in a behavior called rooting. They shove that snout into the earth and just plow forward, ripping up the soil to find roots, grubs, and anything else edible. They can tear up 6 or 7 square feet of ground in just 1 minute. Now, imagine a family group called a sounder. of 20 or 30 animals all rooting for hours. They don't just damage a field, they obliterate it. They turn fertile ground into a torn-up, cratered landscape that looks like it's been bombed. Texas farmers lose an estimated $118.8 million annually to wild boar damage to AZ animals. A single sounder can destroy $10,000 worth of crops in one night and return the next night. And here is the most shocking part for most people. Only about 5 to 10% of the crop damage they cause is from them actually eating the plants. The other 90 to 95% is pure, wanton destruction from their trampling and rooting. They knock over irrigation systems, shred fences, and create erosion ditches. What they don't eat, they flatten and ruin beyond any hope of harvest. They are not just foragers. They are four-legged wrecking crews, and they have brought the entire state of Texas to its knees. This was the impossible problem that demanded a genius solution. Why everything else failed. Faced with this exploding threat, you would think the solution would be simple: unleash the hunters. But this is where things get really strange, because everything we thought would work completely backfired. The first and biggest failure was recreational hunting. On the surface, it looked perfect. Texas made it incredibly easy to hunt wild boar. No closed season, no bag limits. You can hunt day or night with almost any weapon you can imagine. It was a hunter's free-for-all. But it had a fatal flaw. It turns out hunters are people, and people like trophies. They naturally target the biggest, most impressive animals, the massive males with the giant curved tusks. They're the ones that look good on a wall. So while hunters were happily taking these trophy boars, they were ignoring the real engine of the invasion: the females and the young pigs. Think of it like this: taking out the big males is like capturing a few generals, but leaving the entire army of breeding females and their children behind. One single male can father countless litters, so removing him doesn't even put a dent in the population growth. The hunters were, with the best intentions, just pruning the branches while the roots grew stronger and deeper every single day. The proof of this disaster is written all over the United States. Look at Tennessee. In 1999, they had a bright idea. Let's encourage everyone to hunt wild boars to control them. At the time, the boars were in just a handful of counties. But just 12 years later, after all that hunting, the boars had exploded into 70 counties. The hunting program didn't control them. It spread them like a virus. How? Because people wanted to hunt them closer to home. So they illegally trapped boars in one area and drove them to new areas to release them for sport. This illegal translocation meant the boars were spreading faster on the backs of trucks than they ever could on their own hooves. So if hunting made it worse, what about paying people to do the job? Enter the bounty system. This seemed like a no-brainer. Offer cash for every dead boar. But humans, being clever, found a way to break the system. The bounty created a twisted, perverse incentive. Suddenly, it was in someone's financial interest to have wild boars on their land. There were stories of people secretly farming boars, keeping breeding populations so they could always have a supply of carcasses to turn in for cash. Fraud ran rampant, with people driving boars in from other counties, even other states, to claim the local reward. And worst of all, people started putting out extra food to attract more boars to their land, which only fed the population explosion. They were literally fattening up the problem to make a quick buck. Now let's talk about traps. The old-fashioned small box traps. This was the go-to method for farmers for generations. But the wild boar is not a dumb animal. It is cunning, observant, and has a fantastic memory. A farmer would set a box trap, catch 1 or 2 pigs from a sounder of 20, and think he was making progress. But he wasn't. He was creating a far bigger problem. The pigs that escaped, they saw their buddies get caught. They learned what that metal box meant. They became what trappers call trap smart. These educated survivors wouldn't go near a trap again. And they didn't keep this life-saving knowledge to themselves. They taught it to their young. They taught it to the other pigs in the sounder. So the farmer would go back the next week, and the entire group would avoid his trap like the plague. He had successfully trained his enemy to be smarter and more cautious. Every failed attempt made the animals harder to catch in the future. It was a losing game of whack-a-mole where the moles were learning, communicating, and outsmarting their human opponents at every turn. The genesis of genius. So there they were, stuck. Hunters were making the problem worse. Bounties were a joke, and their traps were just training the boars to be smarter. It was a battle they were losing year after year. Something had to change. And the change that came wasn't a new tool, not at first. It was a new thought, a complete shift in mindset. The farmers who finally cracked the code stopped thinking like hunters. They stopped thinking like farmers even. They started thinking like military generals. Imagine you're not trying to catch a pest. You're trying to defeat an intelligent, adaptable enemy army that operates under the cover of darkness. You don't just run into battle. You study, you plan, you use intelligence. You set a trap so perfect that the enemy walks into it without ever knowing you were there. This was the paradigm shift. This was the moment everything changed. The war against the wild boar was no longer a series of skirmishes. It became a campaign of strategy. The first and most powerful weapon in this new war wasn't a trap or a gun. It was a camera. But not just any camera. This was the intelligence revolution. Cellular trail cameras changed the entire game. Before this, farmers had to physically check their land, spooking the incredibly cautious boars with their human scent and sound. They were operating blind. Now they could place these cameras on a fence post and walk away. The cameras would sit silently, watching day and night. And whenever an animal triggered the motion sensor, it wouldn't just save a picture. It would instantly send that picture to the farmer's smartphone. This was a tidal wave of information. Farmers could now learn the boar's secrets. They could map their exact movement patterns. They knew what time they showed up, which paths they traveled, and how many were in each family group. This was no longer guesswork. It was data-driven science. For the first time, the farmers had the upper hand in intelligence. They could see the enemy without the enemy seeing them. With all this new information, the core problem became crystal clear. The old small traps were failing because they were partial solutions. They would catch 2 or 3 pigs, but let 10 or 15 escape. Those escapees learned the lesson and became trap smart, teaching their young to avoid the danger forever. So the challenge was no longer, how do we catch a boar? The challenge became much bigger, much smarter. The real engineering problem was this: how do you design a trap system that can capture an entire sounder, dozens of animals, in one single, decisive action? How do you get every single member of the family group at once, so that there is no one left to learn, no one left to teach, no one left to remember? If you could do that, you wouldn't just remove a few pests. You would erase an entire bloodline from your property. You would solve the trap smart problem forever, because there would be no survivors to become smart. This was the million-dollar question. The answer to this question, this need for a total decisive solution, is what forced the creation of the genius trap. It wasn't invented by accident. It was engineered out of sheer necessity, born from a new way of thinking and a flood of real-time intelligence. The stage was set for a masterpiece of strategy to unfold. The setup: building the banquet hall. The first step was to think big. Farmers abandoned the tiny box traps that could only catch a couple of pigs. Those were like trying to catch a school of fish with a single hook. What they needed was a net. They started building what are known as corral traps. These are huge, circular or rectangular enclosures made of sturdy steel panels or heavy-duty fencing. Think of a giant open-air cage, strong enough to hold not just 2 or 3 boars, but 30, 40, or even 50 animals at once. This was the physical stage. It was no longer a small, scary contraption. It was just a simple, open space. The boars could walk in and out freely, and that was the entire point. But building the cage was just the start. The real magic began with a campaign of psychological warfare. This is called the pre-baiting protocol, and it's all about patience and manipulation. After setting up the corral, the farmer would leave the main gate wide open. Then they would start putting out delicious, smelly bait. They'd scatter corn and other feed both outside the trap and, crucially, deep inside the enclosure. For days, sometimes for weeks, the farmer would do nothing but feed the boars. Every day, the sounder would show up following their noses. They would feast on the free food outside, then cautiously venture inside to get the even bigger pile of food in the center. This patience phase typically lasts 7 to 14 days, sometimes 3 full weeks for especially cautious sounders. Most farmers can't wait that long, but the ones who do see success rates above 90%. Day after day, this routine became their new normal. The corral stopped being a strange object in their environment. It became the world's best dinner table. The fear was gone. Their guard dropped completely. They learned that this specific spot was a guaranteed risk-free meal. The farmers were no longer setting a trap. They were running a restaurant, and the boars were their most loyal customers. This process of building trust and routine was the critical foundation for everything that followed. Without it, the smartest trap in the world would remain empty. Strike the ghost in the machine. Now, with the boars happily and predictably visiting their personal banquet hall, it was time for the masterstroke. This is where 20th century trapping met 21st century technology. The old way involved a tripwire or a pressure plate that the boar would trigger. But that was the flawed method that created educated survivors. The new way took the trigger out of the boar's hooves and put it into the farmer's hand. This was the remote trigger system, the absolute heart of the genius trap. Here's how it worked. The farmer had a cellular camera set up pointed directly at the corral, providing a live video feed straight to their smartphone. The gate of the trap was connected to a mechanism, a spring-loaded hinge or a motor that could be activated by a digital signal. The farmer could be anywhere, at home, in town, even in another state, and could watch the live feed from the trap. The final act required nerves of steel. The farmer would watch as the sounder arrived for their nightly meal. They'd see the first few pigs wander in, then a few more. They would have to patiently wait, counting the animals on their screen, resisting the urge to act too soon. They were waiting for that one perfect moment when the entire family group was inside the corral, all comfortably eating, with no stragglers left outside. Then, with the entire sounder contained, the farmer would simply tap a button on their phone. Instantly, a signal was sent. The gate would slam shut. From the boar's perspective, it was incomprehensible. 1 second they were eating dinner. The next they were captured with no human ever in sight, no sound of a gunshot, no clumsy mechanical trigger. It was like a ghost had caught them. Within hours, the trapped boars are humanely euthanized, removing an entire breeding lineage, something that would have taken months with traditional methods. The first time this worked perfectly was a revelation. Imagine a farmer sitting in his living room watching 30 boars on his screen. He sees the massive sow lead her entire family inside. His heart is pounding. He waits, watching the last hesitant youngster finally step in. He taps his screen. The gate closes. In that moment, the entire frustrating, decades-long war changed. This wasn't a partial victory, this was a total, decisive win. An entire breeding lineage had just been erased from his land in one silent, digital stroke. The trap smart problem was solved. There were no survivors to learn the lesson. The genius of the trap wasn't just in the steel or the wire. It was in the perfect, patient, and remote execution that finally, truly, outsmarted the enemy. The integrated war room. The genius trap changed everything. But one trap on one property isn't enough. Boars don't respect property lines. A farmer can eliminate every boar on his land only to have a new sounder wander in from his neighbor's property the next week. The real revolution wasn't just the trap technology, it was what happened when farmers started talking to each other. They formed informal networks and text message groups. Someone spots a sounder leaving their north field. They warn the neighbor, "Heads up, about 20 hogs heading your way." Farmers started coordinating their trapping efforts, hitting boars on multiple properties simultaneously. They created a regional defense grid with no safe zones. This network effect transformed individual farmers into a unified force. Within this coordinated strategy, the genius trap is the centerpiece, the queen on the chessboard. Its power is unleashed through a systematic phased campaign. It all starts with Phase 1, intelligence gathering. For 1, sometimes 2 full weeks, the farmers do nothing but watch. They deploy a network of cellular cameras across their property, mapping the enemy's movements and routines. Without this intelligence, any action is just a guess. Once they have the blueprints of the boars' lives, they move to Phase 2, strategic decimation. Using the intel from the cameras, they place the large corral traps exactly where the biggest sounders travel, capturing entire groups in one fell swoop to deliver a massive blow to the population. But there are always survivors. That's where Phase 3, coordinated cleanup, begins, using supplementary methods to support the main trapping effort. For vast open pastures, farmers contract helicopter teams for rapid removal. For night operations, ground crews use thermal scopes and suppressed rifles. For thick brush, specially trained K9 units track and hold the most elusive boars. Together with the network and the trap, these traditional methods create an inescapable system. The genius trap is the spearhead, but the network of neighbors is the shield that holds the line. The new harvest. So what happens to the boars after capture? Historically, they were a loss, but Texans turned that liability into a regulated supply chain. Trappers sell live animals to state-approved buying stations. The boars then go to USDA-inspected processors. Meat is inspected, packaged, and sold into niche markets. Restaurants and grocers pitch it as lean, wild-harvested pork, sometimes marketed as a healthier alternative. It's an unexpected recycling. The invaders that ravage fields end up on plates. That said, this commerce is symbolic, not a silver bullet. Revenue from boar sales is a sliver compared with the millions in agricultural damage and control costs. It's not a get-rich scheme, nor does it fund eradication efforts. Instead, its value is practical and cultural. It reframes the problem. Where once feral swine were only pests, they've become a managed resource, part of a controlled harvest that reduces waste and creates modest economic returns. This circular approach doesn't solve the larger ecological challenge, but it changes the narrative. Rather than an endless battle of extermination, management and market incentives align to mitigate harm and extract some benefit. Buyers and chefs prize the meat for its distinct, gamey flavor and lean profile, and specialty butchers and farmers markets carry it. The legal pipeline also ensures traceability and food safety standards, turning an ecological headache into a valuable, regulated commodity while supporting control efforts. It's a small, clever outcome. Ingenuity that takes a destructive force and squeezes a bit of good from it. Winning the unwinnable war. Is the war over? No. Complete eradication of 2.6 million boars is impossible. But here's what changed. Remote-triggered trap systems capture 88% of targeted wild boar populations in a single event. Traditional methods captured less than half. That difference is everything. The old traps created trap-smart survivors who taught their young to avoid danger. The new system captures entire sounders. No survivors, no learned behavior, no problem passing to the next generation. Texas farmers must remove 66% of boars annually just to maintain stable populations. With 88% capture rates, they're finally hitting that target. Farmers who lost $50,000 annually to boar damage report losses dropping to $5,000 or less. The population isn't eliminated, but it's managed. New boars still wander in, but coordinated neighborhood networks catch them before they establish breeding populations. The lesson is clear: you don't need to eliminate a problem to win. You just have to control it well enough that it can't win either. Texas farmers did it not with bigger guns, but with better data, infinite patience, and one perfectly timed button press.